Can you beat Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights without the double jump springs? You probably have one of two reactions hearing that. Either, there's no way that's possible, you need to double jump for like everything. Or, I've never seen this game in my entire life. Either way, let me explain. Night of 100 Frights is basically structured in a Metroidvania style. This means that the levels are designed as a big connecting world, with some shortcuts scattered throughout certain areas. And the way we progress is by grabbing different power-ups to upgrade Scooby and grant him more tools for his moveset. At the start of the game, Scooby can only perform a single jump, but the springs, the first real useful power-up, let Scooby double jump. You collect them in the first 5 minutes of a playthrough, and they're meant to be used throughout the entire rest of the game. I always thought it would be really cool to somehow make it to the end without this important power-up. So that's going to be the challenge for this video. Getting to the final boss without collecting the springs. Everything else is allowed. Will this be possible? Well, in almost 23 years since the game's release, this challenge has never been done before. But I am a speedrunner of Frights, as well as just obsessed with it, so maybe I can put some of my obscure knowledge to use. Lastly, I want to mention two more things. Although I will avoid using them, task tools like save states are allowed. This isn't a challenge to test my gaming skills like a zero deaths run. We're only interested in if this is theoretically possible. More like the A button challenge in Mario 64. Also, for a variety of reasons that we'll get into later, this will all be played on the North American GameCube version. So with that out the way, let's try beat Scooby-Doo with just the single jump. The start of the game is very straightforward, since this is the one part actually designed for you not to have double jump. So we start by entering the playground tutorial area to grab some Scooby snacks, since, as well as needing certain power-ups, we'll sometimes need to unlock levels by paying a certain number of snacks to remove snack gates. So we pay the first snack gate, talk to Holly to unlock the map, and then talk to the groundskeeper Don Knotts to collect the actual first power-up of the run, the shovel. The shovel allows Scooby to dig up flowers to collect items. Yet, there's only like 5 flowers in the game, and this is the only time where it's required, so this isn't much help to us. But now we can enter the dock levels, so we can easily go finish these in order to reach the pier. Where we face our first major hurdle of the run. The end of the pier features a dead end with the springs power-up we won't be collecting. Don Knotts tells us we're gonna need a spring in our step, and there are no other levels left to enter. Here the game is trying to force us to grab the springs, so that back in the hub we can get this high-up key needed to unlock the hedge maze. And unfortunately, they really placed this key at just the right height where it's impossible to get without double jumping. So how do we progress from here? We need to enter the hedge maze to get the helmet item and unlock the mana. So there's no way to avoid this key. It has to be picked up. That means we're gonna have to get a bit creative. Do you see this tree? Do you notice that it moves for some reason? Well, the fact that this tree sways slightly lets us do an extremely difficult set of precise inputs. When the tree is slanted to the right, it's possible to squeeze Scooby between it and the invisible wall beside it, essentially creating two glitchy ledges that Scooby can use to jump up to this point. Now, while the tree slants to the left, you can jump around the back of it and then turn to partially clip inside of the tree, allowing for another jump mid-air. Now all it takes is landing on some ledges on this stationary tree twice, to then jump and reach the key without the springs.
Congratulations! Congratulations! Congratulations.
With the hedge maze now unlocked, we're past the point of the game arbitrarily forcing the power-up on us. So now we can say that the challenge truly begins. Hedge 1 is pretty simple, so nothing too hard here. But there is immediately a couple of problems in Hedge 2. This gap before the bridge is slightly too far to make without the double jump, and the exit at the end of the level is placed higher than the rest of the terrain, so it also doesn't look possible to get up without double jumping. Fortunately though, there are some things that we can do here. The first gap can be cleared by landing on a ledge below and quickly jumping up. Then, the exit can be reached by doing a specific jump into the bottom corner, but only when walking, not running. This is because Scooby's jump mechanic is actually more in-depth than it seems on the surface. He has 3 different jump animations depending on his current move state. A running jump when running, a neutral jump when skidding or not moving, and a walking jump when just walking. For our case here, the walking jump causes Scooby to curve upwards a bit more than his other animations, allowing this ledge to barely be climbed. Now you would probably expect that every level from now on is gonna include some similar problems to Hedge 2, yet surprisingly, every other level going to the helmet is super easy. Clearly these stages weren't designed around just a single jump, but outside of Hedge 2, none of the hedge, greenhouse, or hill pose us any real threat. This lets us collect the first major power-up of the challenge, the helmet. When the helmet is unlocked, it allows Scooby to defeat enemies, which isn't particularly useful, except it will be necessary to fight some bosses, including the final boss. But our main use of the helmet will be to destroy objects and push buttons. So with our new ability, we can break these cobwebs that usually block off the mana, and start making our way towards the first boss fight of the game, the Black Knight. And luckily, most of these interior mana levels aren't too platforming focused, instead relying more on avoiding enemies as the main gameplay. Mind 1 is a bit tricky, with Scooby having just barely enough height to get on the stairs, but every level's looking quite doable so far. Okay, never mind. The upstairs area is part of the rooftop section of the game, and these levels would be fine if it wasn't for this section in Upstairs 3. That's because it features our now 2 worst enemies, Shaggy and a large vertical climb. Sometimes in levels, Shaggy wants us to grab him and throw him to something. This is okay. But sometimes he wants to grab us to throw us to something, and this can cause problems. Normally in this room, Shaggy grabs you and throws you onto these trampolines. You then hit the button up top to let him come up too, so that he can stand on this button and unlock the exit. 2 big issues. Firstly, Shaggy launching Scooby is definitely much higher than our regular jump, but this still isn't enough to get onto the first trampoline without double jumping. Secondly, even if we got onto the first trampoline somehow, it doesn't bounce us high enough to reach the next one without, again, double jumping. So how can you get past this room? Well, you can't. I tried jumping on the bats that chase Shaggy around. I tried getting the perfect angle to clip up, but it just wasn't going to happen. So I guess that's the end. You can't beat Scooby-Doo 9100 Frights without double jumping. Except, that's not entirely true. While I'm not kidding, you definitely can't get through this room. But maybe there's a way to skip going here entirely. The reason you go through the manor at all is to reach the Black Knight, where when you defeat him, he grants Scooby the galoshes. which are used for moving around like normal on sticky tar. But the galoshes aren't that helpful. The only reason we really need them is to get to the fish cannery, because there's no other way to enter without breaking these barrels on the tar. Well, if we had the springs, then you can actually easily skip this by just jumping over, but obviously we can't do that. So instead, we can try to use the fact that we don't have the springs to our advantage. Let me explain. This is the second dock level from earlier. Each time you enter this level, the game does a check. Does Scooby have the springs? If he does, then the door to the pier, which contained the springs, is locked permanently. Why did they do this? Well, the pier levels actually connect to the area you reach after finishing the cannery. So the developers realized that if they don't lock this door, then you could just come back after beating the Black Knight and skip playing these levels entirely. And they wanted to make sure that you suffer through them. But you may have already realized by now that since we never picked up the springs, this door is still open to us, even though it shouldn't be. Yet, we still don't have the galoshes because of that Shaggy level. And even then, the way to the other side is blocked by an invisible wall. So how can we get across to the other side? Well, before we talk about that, we first need to discuss water. I quite like water, but Scooby doesn't. It causes him to die as soon as he touches it. If you've played the game yourself, you might have even experienced a death like this, where you jump on a boat and are clearly not touching any water, but die anyway. If you never experienced that, then you probably played on the PS2 version. On PS2, the water doesn't have an actual tide moving up and down. The water is just a flat object that kills Scooby, and the waves are purely visual. But that is not the case on GameCube and Xbox. On these versions, the water does actually move, and the waves will kill Scooby. Sometimes. Since the water's collision is now accurate to its visuals, they gave the water some leniency to stop it from immediately killing Scooby. Yet this leniency has two problems. It accidentally stops working after you die and respawn, which is what causes those unfair deaths. And secondly, and most importantly, it can also be abused to clip through water by falling into it at the perfect time. This means we can use this crab passing this barrel as a visual cue for when to walk into the water, and as long as we haven't died, Scooby will go straight through. But why is this even useful? Well, to stop players from falling forever if they did get out of bounds, the developers made it so Scooby teleports back into the level when he enters the void, which we call a void warp. Where Scooby void warps to depends on wherever the player object for Scooby is placed in the level. And in Pier 2, it happens to be placed at the side of the level we aren't meant to be able to reach, therefore taking us to exactly where we need to go. So after all that, we can finally say that the challenge is still alive. We skipped the Black Knight, the galoshes, and the cannery levels, all without the springs. From here, we can barely jump across this large gap, and then use a small rock on the tar to jump up and enter the coast area. Coast 1 has a couple hard jumps, but nothing too difficult. And luckily, we can break these crates at the end and grab the keys, since we have the helmet. Coast 2 is then easy, and Coast 3 also has a few large gaps, but it's all totally possible. The next level, Whichway, features a gap that we can't cross without double jumping. But similar to in Hedge 2, we can just land on a ledge on the side of the wall to get across. The rest of the level is all doable, and the lighthouse has no jumping sections, allowing us to easily grab the Supersmash power-up. And the Supersmash is great for this challenge, because it not only allows Scooby to ground pound enemies and objects from above, but it actually lets us get even more distance after jumping. since it locks Scooby in the air temporarily but doesn't lock movement, therefore letting us jump just a little bit further each time. Now the next area we're going to try and reach is the graveyard, so that we can fight the second boss, Green Ghost, and get the objectively best power-up in the game, the Umbrella. But first, we can use this shortcut in Shock 2 to reach the Creepy Crawlies levels without needing to pay a 500 snack gate. And these passage levels don't give us any issues, which lets us easily grab the Plunger's power-up, which stops Scooby from sliding down on sloped surfaces. This also isn't particularly useful for anything, but will be needed later in the caves to go up a slippery slope without sliding down. Now we can warp back to where we got the helmet and access Skull Cliff by super smashing this button. Skull Cliff 1 and 2 are pretty easy. These trampolines are a bit far apart, but now we can easily bounce on them by ground pounding for more distance. Skull Cliff 4 is also surprisingly easy, except for this one boat we can't usually get to without double jumping. But again, we can just super smash in the air to reach it. Now in the caves, we can use the plunges to go up the first slope, easily knock down the stalactites in the second part to get across to the exit, and then the third part is just an auto-scroller where the water gradually rises in the cave, so it's easy to just wait and go across. However, there is a difficult section at the top with these boats, since they're all spaced quite far apart. Luckily though, these boats don't sink below the water like others in the game. These ones are always moving upwards at the same speed as the water, and simply stop moving when Scooby lands on them. But once you dismount them, they start rising again. So, if we super smash onto a boat and jump off quick enough, then it's possible to get a second jump off of each one, therefore letting the water and boats rise high enough to let us reach the exit's platform. There's also technically a power-up here that causes enemies to get stunned when Scooby slams down beside them, but it's basically completely useless. We've now made it to the graveyard, and the first few levels are very easy, letting us reach this 600 snack gate to enter the last set of stages in the area. But then we get to a familiar problem. A Shaggy level. I guess for some reason the developers loved adding a section to levels where Shaggy doesn't give you enough height, since here, we need to get this key to unlock the exit gate, but we simply can't reach it. Shaggy just does not throw Scooby high enough. There is something we can do though, and that's skip the level entirely. Again, not using some crazy glitch though, but instead using a simple mistake from the developers. The way the warp system works in this game is that every time you press the button to warp to a level while in a warp gate, the game does a check to see if you've activated that warp gate before, and if so, you can go there. Makes sense, right? Well, for one single warp in the game, they accidentally check to see if you've activated the wrong warp gate. And luckily for us, that happens to be the warp right after this room with Shaggy, where it checks to see if you've activated the warp gate in the level before this room where we just paid the snack gate. So as soon as we touch it, Scooby will say, "It's a warp gate!" causing this warp gate to activate, and essentially the one after too, letting us skip straight past this problem level. Now finally, we reach the first boss of our run, the intended second boss, Green Ghost. This fight simply requires you to get lucky, by having Daphne and the Green Ghost align on the same coffin, and then ground pounding the correct button 3 times. So as you can expect, this fight is no issue. This officially grants us one of the most important movement power-ups in the entire game, the Umbrella. This lets Scooby float across gaps and float upwards on fans, which will be needed to reach the next area. Now let's go use it to get to the exit and start making our way towards the Redbeard boss fight. Wait, why is Scooby not gliding? I'm pressing the right button. Oh. So it turns out that even if you try using it after jumping, or falling, or bouncing off a trampoline, the game will not deploy the umbrella, even though we collected it, unless you double jump first. So what can we actually do now? The next intended area is to get to the shipwreck levels, which requires the umbrella to float up this fan. And even if we got to them somehow, they all pretty much require the umbrella to float to things. The secret lab at the end of the game requires us first to get the soap bubbles, and the soap is found inside the basement, which requires you to gum these enemies to jump up and do this puzzle on the ceiling of Creepy 3. And where do you get the gum? From fighting Redbeard, after the shipwreck levels. So this does truly seem like the end for the challenge. There's simply nowhere left to go without being able to umbrella. This run just got 100 times harder. But obviously I'm not giving up, because there's one possible silver bullet that I haven't yet mentioned. Remember the first level that wasn't possible with Shaggy? Well, it's actually really great that we didn't complete that level, since now we can go back and he still spawns in. That means we can get our revenge and now use Shaggy to our advantage. Help! Imagine if you could take the big launch you get when Shaggy throws Scooby and use it in another level. Well, you actually can. Kinda. There's another developer oversight we can use, specifically with this animation Shaggy does after throwing you. It's meant to stop when you land, but if you land and continue running, then he will stay like that for some reason. And since Shaggy is unable to grab you while running, if you run into him from above during this animation, then nothing happens. Seemingly. But now, as soon as we jump, Shaggy will teleport over to us. And now we can use his throw from anywhere, even in other levels. Since Shaggy doesn't physically exist in other levels, it seems like Scooby starts floating, but we can still use the physics of the throw. And there's only a couple of limitations. Firstly, we can only use it once each time, and if we wanted to do it again, then we would need to return to Shaggy and come back. Secondly, Shaggy Storage gets activated as soon as we jump or fall, meaning there's not much control on when to use it. If we want to activate it higher up in a level, then there would need to be some way to get up there without jumping at all. And lastly, this glitch crashes. A lot. On Xbox, it doesn't work at all, and crashes everywhere. While on GameCube and PS2, it only works in a bit less than half of all levels. This is because, essentially, the animation of Scooby getting grabbed isn't loaded globally. It only exists within a Shaggy level. Yet, it gets stored in memory for as long as the game can. So if you enter a level that doesn't contain too many enemies, then the animation doesn't get overridden, and everything works. But if a level has too many enemies or NPCs, then it will get overridden, and as soon as you try to activate Shaggy, the game crashes. And once the animation's no longer in memory, the only way to stop the game from crashing is to go back to a Shaggy level and reload it into memory. So yeah, if you can't tell, this glitch is pretty limited. But unfortunately, it's the only option left. So let's see if this glitch can even be used. Now we can't actually leave this area with Shaggy Storage, since the game would crash before we get to the next available Warpgate. But luckily, we can abuse saving to bypass this. Shaggy Storage actually persists through the main menu. So by saving first in a non-crash level before setting up the glitch, we can then quit after and just load the save file, while retaining the Shaggy state. This doesn't allow us to just load into any level, since in this game, you can only save in specific areas that contain a spinning mystery machine. But this is still pretty useful. Now, finally, can we use it to get to the shipwreck levels? No, the game crashes. Can we use it to get to the secret lab? No, the game crashes. Can we use it to get into the basement? Okay, so it actually doesn't crash in Creepy 3. But now there's another problem. We still don't get enough height to get up. So let me explain another mechanic of this glitch I haven't yet mentioned. Shaggy gliding. Wahoo! Recall that ground pounding locks you in the air for a moment? Well, if we have Shaggy Storage and jump, and then Super Smash right after, it will actually get interrupted and keep Scooby locked in the air permanently until we get thrown. This is great for crossing very large distances by now just Shaggy gliding over. But here, we can use it to gain just enough extra height to make it up to the top section of the level. Now, problem number 2. We need to get over to these chains to remove the fire blocking the door. But we don't have enough height to reach these platforms, and we've used up our one Shaggy throw. But there is something we can exploit here. On the fire, there are 2 spherical triggers that kill Scooby as soon as he enters them. The keyword there being enter. If we were somehow immune at the moment of touching the sphere, then Scooby would go right through the fire and access the exit. And it turns out, there's something right here that can help with that. The hints in this game do 2 things. They cause text to appear on screen, and lock Scooby's movement. And when Scooby's movement gets unlocked, you're granted about half a second of immunity to damage. So all we need to do is walk into the fire right after reading the hint to completely skip this puzzle. So the run is actually still alive somehow. We skipped into the basement early without both the springs and the umbrella. But our struggle is far from over. In Gust 1, we're immediately met with our main antagonist, Shaggy. Except he's gotten stuck in a barrel somehow. We lure him over to this button to solve the puzzle, and there's a hole in the wall we can't reach. So I tried jumping up with a walking jump, like in Hedge 2, but you're barely too low. So let's just Shaggy Storage it, I guess. And the game crashes. So this seems kinda bad. But again, we can use Shaggy's help to solve this. The way I got past this was using the fact that you can bounce on Barrel Shaggy's head for some reason. So by lining up Shaggy in a way that he will walk towards the button, and then bouncing on him right before he reaches it, you can manage to get up. The rest of the level is smooth sailing. That is until Gust 2. This is definitely one of the worst possible levels we could be faced with for this challenge. You're intended to activate a fan and float up to the top of the level with the umbrella to collect keys. And then you're expected to float up yet another fan with the umbrella to get to the exit. Both of these tasks we obviously can't do, and Shaggy Storage doesn't crash, but also doesn't give anywhere near enough height for either of these fans. So I know what you're thinking, this seems completely impossible. But it can't be since there's still 18 minutes of the video left. And yeah, you're right, we can get past this. But I'm gonna need to redo the entire challenge. As it turns out that the plunge's power-up is actually a power down. We collected it to get up that slope earlier in the caves to reach Green Ghost, but the umbrella doesn't do anything, so we didn't actually need to do that. And for Shaggy Storage's final gift, we need to not have the plunges. So 2 hours later, And I'm back. But now, plunger free. This means Scooby can utilize one more super glitchy aspect to Shaggy gliding. Storing slope momentum. There's a slope right here in Gust 2. When you have the plungers, it does nothing. But when you don't, it slides you down. So if we start Shaggy gliding in the air, and then start sliding down the slope, if we perfectly slide off this pole, so that our last bit of momentum is pointed upwards, then this also gets stored by the glide state. This makes it possible to very, very slowly rise up to the top of the level and collect the keys. Then we just go back to Shaggy to store him again and come back. But this time, the door is unlocked, so we can very slowly rise up the fan and reach the exit. Pretty simple stuff. Now we're in the cellar, and we're greeted with this seemingly innocent short level. And yeah, on the surface this doesn't seem too bad. There's a chain on the ceiling which we can't reach, because you're meant to gum the Space Kook to jump up, and there's no warp gate for us to use to set up Shaggy Storage. However, there is a save machine here, so we can just set it up and then load a save. Luckily, it doesn't crash here, and we can progress without much of an issue. This seems fine, but the problem comes in conjunction with the level after, because this stage features the exact same problem. We're meant to grab this chain to lower the keys in order to progress, yet we can't reach the chain. And this time, there's no save or warp gate we can use to set up Shaggy Storage. This means that in order to get to this chain, we would somehow need to finish the previous level without both jumping and using up Shaggy, so that we can instead use him here. And this time, I'm not joking, this is impossible to do. However, there are two potential shortcuts in this area that we could possibly exploit. In Gust 1, behind Barrel's Shaggy, there is a door which leads to the room right after the one we're currently stuck in. That's great. Except we're immediately locked behind a gate. And even if we did get past this gate, we can't reach the rest of the level. Shaggy Storage isn't even an option since it crashes in the level we used to get here. This means that this shortcut is completely unusable. That leaves just one option. Back in our seemingly innocent short level, there's actually a whole other room to the left, which features a door that also goes straight to the level we are trying to reach. But the other side of this room only unlocks after we press this button in there to slide the wine rack open. That means that we would need some sort of clip through to reach this shortcut. Yet the entire room is caked in invisible walls, apart from this small section here by the wine rack door, and there's nothing we could use to push Scooby through it. Except for the Space Kook itself. There's a pretty frustrating speedrun strat in this game called Fish Cringe, where you need to line up a sea creature to push Scooby into a crate. Well, imagine something like that, but infinitely worse. Space Kooks do not move to where you want them to. Unlike most other enemies in the game that just chase Scooby, they will stop and shoot you when you're in their line of sight. That means you have to run around, constantly keeping them turning to try get into the right position. And I knew that it was technically possible to clip through this wall with the Space Kook, using the double jump. But it had never been done with just a single jump before, so I was pretty worried that this just wouldn't work at all. But after an hour of trying to get this Space Kook close enough to the wall without dying, and still leaving enough room for Scooby, it finally happened. So somehow, this still isn't over yet. We skip past cellar 1 and 2 to get to cellar 3. And for once, we actually have an easy level. It's just open a door and get some keys. The same can be said for cellar 4. All we need to do is hit the 4 buttons on the ground in quick succession. And then there's a bit of a scary high ledge, but we can just push this ice block over to jump up it. And there it is, the final power-up in the game, the soap. This lets Scooby turn enemies into temporary platforms, which is fairly useful. Crucially though, bats will now spawn in the second passages level, letting us soap them and jump up to the final section of the game. Except we still don't have enough height. Fortunately though, now that there are bats, we can instead bounce on the second one to land on a precise ledge on the wall, and then jump up from there. So we made it to the secret lab. Maybe we'll actually finish this challenge after all. Let's see what the first lab level has in store. Oh. It only contains the largest vertical room in the entire game. You're meant to float up this fan with the umbrella, which we again can't do. And this time, Shaggy can't save us. There's no save or warp here, so our only way to bring Shaggy Storage in would be by entering the room without jumping first, which definitely isn't happening. And even if it were doable, this room would still cause it to crash. And unlike cellar or pier, there are no shortcuts left to abuse. This is a required level to complete, and we're left all on our own to try get up. The usual method for getting up without the umbrella in speedruns is to jump on some invisible ledges on the wall, and then jump on a bat to barely get across. But without the double jump, this just isn't happening. So what options do we actually have here? For every other level, I've had some vague idea of how to get past. But this time, I genuinely didn't know what to do. So I decided to plan out 3 theories of how this fan could possibly be skipped. Firstly, I considered soaping the bats that fly around the room, to possibly alternate jumping between them to reach the top. But this unfortunately wouldn't work. The bats fly around quite a bit off the ground, so you can't really reach them. Plus, they never fly too close together anyway, so jumping between them just isn't possible. So instead, I thought about maybe climbing the wall, but from out of bounds. You are actually able to squeeze Scooby through the invisible wall at the back of the room to escape this area's containment. Out here, the camera doesn't follow Scooby, which is definitely pretty annoying, so whenever I'm out of bounds, I'm going to show a modified camera. You can climb some ledges on the outside and get a little bit of height in some places, including reaching a quarter of the way up the back wall of the stage. But sadly, nowhere near enough to even get close to the top. But I still had one more idea for something to do out of bounds. Wedging Scooby between 2 different walls, visible or invisible, to slowly climb up by jumping in between them, similar to the moving tree from back at the beginning. This definitely seemed like the most promising idea, but Scooby would eventually just get pushed out or not be able to reach any higher. I even tried switching to the European version, just to see if the lower frame rate could make a difference, but honestly, it made it worse. So at this point, I was ready to give up. I considered just scrapping this video, or turning it into a minimum double jump run, I really didn't want to do that. But what other choice did I have? You can't beat Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights without the double jump, because of one big fan. Before completely giving up, I decided to try the wall wedging one more time, hoping that maybe I could get something different to happen. I got to a slightly higher spot, and this was all the motivation I needed to not give up. Because by some extremely lucky chance, a bat also flies right past this spot. So by escaping the wall at the perfect time and ground pounding this bat, you could get barely enough height to land here. But there's still a couple problems. We're out of bounds right now, and there's no way back inside. And even though we're fairly high up, it's still not even close to the platform, let alone the top of the fan room. But another stroke of luck is that the second half of the room is basically right beside us. And even luckier is that the developers put a ton of metal stuff on the wall to make it look more sciencey, I guess. But we can use that by jumping across from our new spot to land on the edge of the metal. From here, we can climb the rest of the metal stuff to reach the ceiling of the lab. We're still out of bounds, but there's one more extremely lucky developer choice that we can use. There's two exit doors at the end of the room. The left door's exit trigger is small enough that it can only be accessed from the inside. Yet the right door's trigger is barely big enough to be accessed from the outside. If this trigger was even the tiniest bit smaller, this wouldn't work. But if we charge and skid to set up a jump midair and hit the perfect angle and timing to get Scooby halfway inside the floor, then it's possible to touch the trigger for a moment and exit into the next room, managing to skip the entire Lab 1 level with just the single jump.
Congratulations! Congratulations!
But there's no time to celebrate, because the lab is still not done trying to stop us. The snack gate entrance to the final boss is located on this platform high above the level. But luckily this time, we can save and set up Shaggy Storage to barely not get enough height. Surely this won't be the end though. There has to be some way up, right? In speedruns, we climb some ledges on the wall in the acid room to get up in the quickest way. So I tried doing this with single jump, and although a lot of it was possible, you can't make the final jump. That leaves just one more option. Doing it the intended way. How you're supposed to reach this area is by hitting this button to raise a platform, then going through the level Lab 3, which takes you to the very top of the room, and then floating down with the umbrella. If you've been paying very close attention, then you might have realized that we can't use the umbrella, so this was gonna be tough. Actually going through Lab 3 is easy. There's a tight jump to reach the button at the center, but besides that, there's no issues for once. Though getting to the other side of Lab 2 from the top is a whole other story. You are able to reach the floating platform by again charging and doing a skid to jump mid-air. Then I tried doing the same thing for the final jump. And it's not enough. But at this point, I had no other options left. And since it seemed so close, I just kept on trying and failing this jump over and over again. Then I realized something. These bolts on its surface were physically raising Scooby upwards ever so slightly. So by charging at the perfect angle off of these, and then jumping and slamming at the perfect timing, you could just about make it. If this platform was placed just the smallest bit further away or lower down, then it wouldn't work. And that's basically the theme of this entire run. If this ledge in Which Way or Hedge didn't exist, it would be impossible. If the water or Shaggy was coded better, it wouldn't be possible. If this tree didn't move, if this trigger was slightly smaller, any minor change would make this impossible. But it's not. We pay the final snack gate of the run and enter the final 2 levels. The Shark Room wants us to float across to these buttons using Shaggy and the umbrella, but we can just easily clip through the door at the end using the D-pad. Then the final platforming challenge of the game requires us to jump across these rising and falling blue objects to get across a gap of acid. And although it's a bit tough, with the right timing, we can jump in Super Smash to make it to the other side. The final boss, Mastermind, is purely a combat challenge. And luckily, we're perfectly capable of that. So with a good spawn, we can push Mastermind into the electricity field and finish the game. Can you beat Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights without the double jump springs? Yes, you can. It's just inhumanly difficult. This game is broken in just the right ways to let cool challenges like this exist. You aren't going to see any incredibly game-breaking bug or crash in your first playthrough, or even in your 50th playthrough. But if you know what you're doing, you can basically just do whatever you want in this game. That's one of the reasons why I love it so much. And if you made it this far, then I hope I got to show that to you as well. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching.